All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us this morning. I know it is back to school for many, so busy, kind of hectic time. So we appreciate you taking a little bit of time out of your morning to join Family Recovery Centers in Sandstone Care. My name is Dana Slowinski. I am co-owner of Family Recovery Centers, and we're excited to partner with Sandstone Care and Dr. Brannon Pruet for this webinar this morning. I'm going to take just a minute to give a very quick overview of Family Recovery Centers, and I'll pass it on to Lindsay. We are an evening intensive outpatient program for adolescents and their parents. We have locations in Lake Bluff, in Hoffman Estates, and St. Charles, Illinois. And I'm just going to highlight two program components. We have a very strong parent component. So parents are actually on site with their child 2 of the 4 evenings that they are with us. So they're working on the skills, they're learning the skills right along with their child, and then they're also doing their own work. So they're looking at their dynamic and their role within the family so that we can really focus on the whole family system and not just the patient. And then we have a 24/7 on call. So staff that is in the program with the patients and the parents are also on call, available to the patients and parents 24/7 to help with skills coaching in their actual environment. We also take most major insurances, and we offer a sliding scale program as well. So that is us in a very quick nutshell. If you have questions or want to talk further about it, please feel free to reach out to myself or Ryan Bright. And with that, I will pass it over. We're very excited to partner with Sandstone Care. I think they are a wonderful organization, and I think they share similar values and really, have that desire to help within the communities that they serve. So with that, I will pass it over to Lindsay Bass. She is the
Everyone mispronounces it. It's fine.
National Clinical Outreach Ambassador for Sandstone Care.
Thanks, Dana. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining today. I'm Lindsay, and like Dana said, National Clinical Outreach for Sandstone. I'm located in the Chicagoland area. I'm excited to partner with you guys to bring you this presentation. I wanted to take a moment to share a little bit about Sandstone. Our niche is teens and young adults struggling with mental health and substance use disorders. We provide a full continuum for adults 18 to 30 years old with co-occurring mental health and substance use disorders in Colorado, Maryland, and Virginia. We also have 2 adolescent boutique residentials in Cascade, Colorado in the mountains, and in Crownsville, Maryland by the bay. We accept most major insurances, and all of our staff are fully licensed, with several holding dual licensure. We focus on treating the family system as a whole while helping to support and launch the client into adulthood when mental health and substance use has derailed them. We are appropriate for the adolescent or young adult who is willing and able to travel out of state and commit to working on themselves and their emotional behavioral issues. Please feel free to reach out to me with any questions moving forward. I will put my contact information in the chat box. All right, so our speaker today, Brannon, has 26 years of experience and a background in acute psych setting, including inpatient community mental health, case management, and behavioral health leadership over many states throughout the U.S. Brannon has a doctorate in psychology and is an LCPC and certified addiction specialist with specialties in trauma, addiction pastoral care, and psychiatric assessment. Brannon is also a practitioner of EMDR, and he interweaves this method and spiritual wellness principles into his interventions. He also has a private practice in Aurora, Colorado, and enjoys hiking with his dogs and attending church in his spare time. He has recently stepped down from program duties as program director of Sandstone Care Denver to launch the clinical services of the Center for Depression, Trauma, and Anxiety at Sandstone this past March. Brannon has been with Sandstone since day one. So if everyone wants to also write down their questions, and then at the end we'll take some time to answer them, that would be great. So without further ado, Brannon can take it away. And thank you guys so much for joining.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Ryan, for having me. Welcome to Recognizing and Confronting Cross Addiction in Adolescents and Young Adults in Recovery. I struggled with the topic for today, having been in the field for so long. Lindsay and I hashed out the idea of what are we seeing regularly, and the idea of cross addiction came to mind. We'll go into exactly what that is momentarily, but let's discuss a few objectives of what we're going to look at today. We want to identify the most common types of cross addiction and their prevalence facing adolescents and young adults in recovery. That's first. Secondly, we want to recognize the effects of these substances on the brain of the person that's in recovery and be able to explain those dynamics to the families of the person who is in recovery. It's important that we do that. At Sandstone Care, similar to what Dana said, we see the family as the identified client. So we wrap the care around the adolescent and the young adult. And if we are not making an impact on that family system, we believe that moving a client out of the treatment system back into a dysfunctional family system will only result in chaos and likely relapse and decompensation. So helping translate these things that we're seeing today with cross addiction to the families is of the utmost importance. Then noting the common indicators that cross addiction is occurring and how to address those from different perspectives will be important. And finally, noting the most effective treatment strategies for dealing with cross addiction from a clinical perspective. So what is cross addiction? According to the Hazelton and Betty Ford Center, cross addiction, also known as addiction transfer or addiction interaction disorder, is when a person has two or more addiction behaviors. So it's like if someone comes in with a primary substance use disorder of alcohol use disorder, and they also have nicotine use disorder or cocaine use disorder, we would say that they have a cross addiction. This can occur with multiple substances as well as behavioral or process addictions, such as food addiction, gambling, sex, and other compulsive behaviors. So that's the basic definition. So I've got my little meme here. This little guy is saying, quit caffeine, sugar is next. I really liked that. That's a common one that I saw on the memes, but that little guy is going to get us started. So these are the types of cross addictions that I identified as being some that we see most often at Sandstone Care. I did have nicotine in there, and then I just, for the sake of time, I thought I would excise that one. But we're going to look at sugar, caffeine, pornography, social media and FOMO, video games, and gambling. So we'll get started with sugar addiction. This may seem not surprising to most, but you've got Cookie Monster there saying, I can stop at any time eating the cookies. 75% of Americans are eating excess sugar and being classified as having an addiction to it. That's unbelievable to me. And I'm thinking that's probably a conservative estimate at best. It is especially problematic for those clients that we have that have depressed moods or low moods, low energy, anhedonia, and things of that nature. And so they begin to crave carbohydrates and any kind of foods that will give them a quick boost. When you have an overconsumption of sugar combined with sort of a sedentary lifestyle, and the more technology has taken over, even with COVID, we're seeing a lot of clients being sitting in front of the computer, doing Zoom meetings, sitting all day long. I literally had one client tell me that she was doing 8 to 9 hours of Zoom meetings because of her workplace being shut down for the pandemic. And so she's literally sitting for 8 to 9 hours a day. You combine that with the overconsumption of sugar, and it contributes to a significant rise in obesity in this country. Finally, sugar has been compared to cocaine in terms of its potential addiction pathways. So the question that I wanted to explore and discuss with you is, how addictive is it? And I found some very interesting results in the empirical literature. So in certain studies with rats, after giving them some periods of controlled food deprivation, meaning they're withholding food from the rats, and then they give them a sugar solution afterwards in a controlled environment, all of the rats began to show behavior similar to the effects of the drugs of abuse that we would normally see when giving similar substances to the rats. So they showed a binge style consumption of sugar in the manner that would release dopamine in the nucleus accumbens, which is, if you go back to your biology, the limbic system or the midbrain is composed of several different regions, and the nucleus accumbens is more of a neural interface between motivation and addiction. And it's very commonly seen in processes like food, sex, drugs of abuse, reward activation, and those types of things. So the rats showed a binge style of consumption after getting the sugar solution. So the access of sugar to these animals acts in the same way of the opioid receptors in the brain. And what I found fascinating was that as they introduced naloxone, or what we would call Narcan, which is given to reverse like heroin overdose and things of that nature. And from my ER experience, I used to see this all the time. But when they gave the naloxone to the rats after giving the access to the sugar, the rats showed opioid-like withdrawal syndrome and anxiety in the same way as if they were addicted to heroin. So I find that fascinating that sugar ingestion produced the same withdrawal effects. Sugar dependency in the rats intensified the use of ethanol by 9%, according to the one study. And so the indicator there is naturally that sugar would act as a gateway to cross-sensitization or cross-addiction to alcohol use. So what are some of the signs of sugar addiction? And these are the things that parents need to really check out. Is watching their kids for the consuming of large amounts of food or drinks laden with sugar. I see a lot of the kids come in and they've got their soda pop, they've got their Monster drinks and so forth, and we'll get to caffeine in a minute, but they've got all these beverages that have a high sugar content, and they have them regularly. The parents are coming in as well to the family sessions with this. They're eating constantly. Many of them are talking about feeling bored and not knowing what to do with themselves, so they're engaging in disordered eating around this. I would say to watch for the restlessness, the high energy that comes with sugar. I noted that the high generally lasts only about 30 or 40 minutes after the consumption of sugar before it begins to taper off. You watch for their language around what they're most interested in and talking about cravings for sugar after stressful or irritating life experiences. When I was working in a residential setting with one young adult, he came up to me in the office and I said, "Wow, you must really be craving." And he said, "What do you mean? How can you tell I'm craving?" This was an abstinence-based residential facility. And I said, "Well, the fact that you're eating Duncan Hines chocolate frosting with a spoon out of the can is my indicator that you're craving sugar right now and that you're craving drugs extremely." And to which he confessed that I was right on. And we see that oftentimes with our client population, the craving spike so very much. And we'll look at why that is in terms of neurophysiology in a moment. Also looking for binge or emotional eating. We see this quite regularly in our substance abuse wing and our mental health wing. When folks are stressed, they begin to eat and crave sugar. So I've got the cat there. I just really loved his face. He says, "I'm on a diet where you cut out all carbs and all sugar and all happiness." So I really liked the expression on that little guy there. So what are some solutions to sugar addiction? Managing and coping with cravings with a plan. You've got to interpret the fact that cravings are going to come and you've got to prepare for them. So it's a lot of times I tell people to take ownership of this and use an approach of more cognitive behavioral pieces where you're planning for these types of things and noting what your thoughts are. Again, we'll go into this in more detail, but you've got to have a plan. Secondly, drink plenty of water. A lot of our clients, because of their use of so much caffeine and it being a diuretic, they will be extremely dehydrated. We often see this when we're getting urinalyses for testing for drugs of abuse. We do that regularly with all of our clients. Many of them have trouble producing a urine specimen, and when they do, it is highly concentrated. So I remind them, drink plenty of water, get good sleep as well. Another few suggestions from registered dietitians is to try natural replacements like stevia, honey, things of that nature that will not add sugar to the particular food. And then, of course, there are many foods that have sugar hidden in them that you wouldn't normally think about. And I think some of them that I put there, so read your labels, have parents go over this with your kids and explain to them that there is sugar that's often in these items that they wouldn't know about. So some of them that I put down, just for example, would be condiments like ketchup and cereal, breakfast cereals, pasta sauce, things like that have more sugar in them than you possibly can imagine. Another recommendation, just to kind of add extra flavor without adding extra sugar, would be adding a spice like, say, cinnamon, that has a flavor that can substitute for the sugar. Limiting sugar intake through fructose, which would be like your juices, your fruit juices, your corn syrup, which has high concentrations of fructose that will then be metabolized as sugar, is also a good idea. Keeping track of your progress. I think a lot of times when we empower clients to take ownership of their behaviors, we want them to be able to see their progress. So for many, we tell them to keep a journal, to chart it, to sometimes track the days. For others, it won't be as helpful, but for many, it is going to be a satisfying thing to see, one, that they are able to reduce these things, and to see a corresponding result in their behavior. And finally, just making a lifestyle of avoiding sugar and trying substitutes and eating in a more healthy fashion with vegetables and so forth is a good idea, according to registered dietitians. Now we'll move into caffeine. Caffeine is a huge issue that I see, and it was discovered by Barnum, Rosen, and Schoendorf in 2014 that about 80% of the world's population consumes caffeinated products every day, including, I found this interesting, 73% of children. Increasing studies revealed that the caffeine does create dependency and withdrawal. It has been added to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual in the most recent edition. Caffeine essentially blocks adenosine, which is a building block of our DNA, and it is a central nervous system neuromodulator, which sedates the system overall. So as caffeine blocks it, it then acts as a stimulant, which is the effects that we see most often in our clients. And it's been shown to increase, as with sugar, the dopamine release in the nucleus accumbens. So if you look, it may be hard to see, but in the background, I have the person with the IV of the coffee pot there running the caffeine right into his system. And the tag is, "I have too much blood." Caffeine effects. So we see this a ton. I actually have a client right now in programming as I work with her in the mental health side. She is consuming 13 Monster drinks a day, which equates to almost over 2.5 grams of caffeine every single day, and she cannot sleep. So when I consulted with the psychiatrist, I said, I think we need to watch this kid very carefully, try to see if we can taper her off, because she was presenting as someone who had almost a bipolar spectrum disorder, and her moods were up and down, up and down. She could not sleep. She was having all this excessive energy. So she had all of these effects. So the first couple are insomnia and GI or gastrointestinal disturbances, muscle twitching, a rambling flow of thought and speech, tachycardia, and cardiac arrhythmia. This young lady actually works in a fairly physical type loading and unloading of warehouse material, and was reporting to me that her watch would monitor her heart rate and tell her that her heart rate was up over 200. And this is a young 19-year-old person who should not normally be getting into that realm. That is very dangerous. And so we have got her tapered off of that right now, but tachycardia, definitely a problem, and cardiac arrhythmia with caffeine intoxication. Periods of inexhaustibility, psychomotor agitation, and restlessness. There's also a nervousness component. She was having, at least early on in programming, a hard time sitting still, excitement, flushed face, and then of course the diuretic effects of production of urine. Okay, this little guy says, "I drank too much coffee and now I can see noise." I love the eyes on this creature. So in another study, rats consuming a proportionate amount of caffeine demonstrated sleep disturbance and poor brain development. Lodato et al. Observed that for every 10 milligrams of caffeine, get this, for every 10 milligrams of caffeine, sleep was impaired by 12%. So then you think about the person that I just mentioned that has basically 2 grams in her system. It's no wonder that she had insomnia for days. Civics 2005 et al. Found that those who qualified for caffeine dependence were nearly 9 times as likely to abuse nicotine, and women with a family history of caffeine abuse and alcohol abuse were 6 times more likely to have a lifetime diagnosis of alcohol use. This is the issue, folks, that I want to stress. With cross addiction, you can say, all right, they're abstinent from their primary drug of abuse, but what we're seeing in the data and experientially, by the way, is that these clients are abusing other substances to compensate. So they may stop using THC for a moment. They may stop drinking alcohol for a moment, but they are immediately running to another substance in a cross-addiction manner, and or to a process or a behavioral addiction. And we'll get to a few of those in a moment. So you could argue that they're not sober. And see, these are legal things that we're talking about. Caffeine, sugar, all legal. They are, again, we're having outrageous problems with people abusing these things. And so many times what we're trying to do in Sandstone is take a holistic approach of targeting all things that are being abused so that the brain can calm down and get to a more baseline state. Note that drug users aren't more at risk to the effects of caffeine than those who do not. And as I just sort of insinuated, energy drink consumption is associated with increased marijuana use, alcohol consumption, and alcohol-related risky behavior. So check out some of these caffeine amounts. These are some of the things that we see a lot with our clientele. So these are things for parents to watch for, and just to they need to read labels too and be educated. Peach Snapple has about 42 milligrams in a 16-ounce drink. A Monster energy drink, which is what my client was consuming, a 16 ounce has 160 milligrams of caffeine. Starbucks Frappuccino, now this is the small one. Okay, not to mention the fact that the guys get the ventis all the time, but 150 milligrams in a small Starbucks Frappuccino. Mountain Dew, one of the most favorite sodas of our clientele, has 55 milligrams for a 12-ounce can. Instant coffee, about 31 milligrams for a teaspoon. Brewed coffee, between 95 and 200 milligrams for an 8-ounce beverage. And then iced tea, about 70 milligrams. So I've got a few more stats to give to you. About 50% of adolescents consume an energy drink, and about 31% consume caffeine on a regular basis. I think that's probably a little bit low. We would see the majority of the clientele that we see at Sandstone abuses caffeine, I think, in my opinion. Energy drink companies are creating the packaging, they're marketing to kids, they're marketing to a younger audience, they're putting different things on the logos, they're putting action things like snowboarding is what I mentioned there in that bullet. They're appealing to a younger crowd. And the SAMHSA reports that about 13,000 emergency room visits in 2009 were associated with energy drinks. I saw this all the time when I worked at the Level 1 Trauma Center. We'd be seeing people with cardiac arrhythmia, tachycardia, heart rate well into the hundreds, and people not feeling well and literally needing to have IV fluids and hydration immediately to counteract some of these intoxication effects of the overdose of caffeine. And according to the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, in a report in 2018, between 2007 and 2011, the number of energy drink related visits to the ER doubled, with 1 in 10 of these visits resulting in hospitalization in 2011. Caffeine overdose can be fatal, you guys. Some of the withdrawal syndrome for caffeine. And let me just stop by saying that withdrawal in the addiction world, we look at withdrawal as being the exact opposite of what intoxication is. So if the caffeine is a stimulant by blocking adenosine, then the withdrawal effects are going to be the opposite. It's going to create the following withdrawal syndromes. Headaches, one of the most common types. Fatigue, sleepiness, trouble concentrating, difficulty completing tasks, irritability, depression, anxiety. Interestingly enough, flu-like symptoms, including nausea, vomiting, muscle aches, and hot and cold spells, as well as impairment in psychomotor and cognitive performance. So here's some advice for parents. Really, what I have to say constantly to parents and to family members of the folks that are at Sandstone is that they have an integral part in the recovery of their child or loved one. And many of the parents are often telling me they don't feel like they have any ability to affect the recovery of their children other than to seek professional advice. And my thought is, no, if they are living with you, if you are a part of their lives, you have an integral part in how their recovery is going to be in terms of its overall success if you participate and model some of the following things for them. So limiting the caffeine for teens. And I think parents are saying, well, how do I do this? How do I possibly police my kid? I think a lot of it has to start with being one of the other bullet points is being a good role model and stocking up smartly. So it's getting and stocking up your fridge with healthy alternatives and really kind of trying to monitor what your child is consuming. Educate yourself about caffeine in the sense that you understand what its effects are. I think people minimize everything that I just talked about. But when you realize that people are going into the emergency room for overdosing on this substance that we consider to be relatively minor in acuity, it's really just about parents getting more educated in what's going on. Talk about it. If there is this draw to caffeine, I literally called that young lady's parents the other day and told them about this monster drink addiction, and they were shocked. I don't think they had any idea that this young gal was consuming 13 monsters a day. And so I really made a pitch to them to talk to her about it when she begins to crave those things, and to make sure that their home refrigerator was stocked with appropriate snacks and beverages. So again, part of it is that the families are coming all in with their venti Starbucks, even to our family sessions. And so it's being a good role model. It's modeling it, saying, hey, if we're asking you to be in recovery, we're likewise going to start cutting back on some things as well. And I think that's really helpful for the young person to see a parent trying to take ownership and reduce sugar and or caffeine intake while they're going through recovery. It's a nice sort of partnership. It's we're in this with you, and we're going to make some changes as well. Limiting the afternoon and evening caffeine can be very helpful, especially with sleep cycles. And then noticing the warning signs, being jittery, nervous, witnessing the drinks, them with drinks that contain a lot of caffeine, as well as poor sleep habits. I chose pornography as a sort of an interesting process addiction, but we are seeing it explode on the scene. In my private practice, I see it all the time. It almost certainly comes out in the marital sessions, couple sessions, and family sessions where one partner or another is abusing this. In an Australian study of 2017, 15 to 29-year-olds revealed 69% of males, 23% of females had viewed pornography prior to the age of 13. 100% of males surveyed and 82% of females had viewed pornography at some point in their life. 39% of males and 4% of females had viewed porn daily, and 19% of college men and 4% of college women reported addiction to porn, while other studies were as high as 28% for males. So why this increase in pornographic material? Well, the sites are easy to access. They're everywhere. As you go on the internet, regulation of the sites are almost non-existent. I laughed because I think some of them basically just ask a question, are you 18? And then the person says yes, and you're automatically in. Youth are targeted by these types of software that have malicious phishing tactics and links, and they're being targeted. You can click on a link and all of a sudden be drifted right into a very inappropriate adult site. And many of the youth are visiting them regularly. I'm dating myself, but I remember the days pre-internet. And so gone are the days where a person would have to go out and buy this material in front of another person and show an ID or something like that. And so now it's literally point and click. So with the massive internet data, you guys, the cascading neuronal stimulation is unbelievable. And some of these results, I think, are going to just be intriguing to you. So the idea is that plasticity is competitive. The brain, once it gets flooded with these activations and the reward circuitry, the person is going to be bored with almost everything else. And when I'm doing my couples work, when I'm doing the marital work, and people are talking about intimacy and what's going on, the pornographic stimulation and overuse then creates problems for them to connect in their intimacy. And that's another thing we'll see in just a moment. So what are some of the effects and the warning signs to look for? Diminished libido, erectile dysfunction, relationship chaos and strife, social anxiety, depression and shame, isolation and secrecy, especially with devices and media. This is a huge problem. People are beginning to, the things that would have caused them embarrassment before, as I mentioned, are no longer there. Those barriers have been removed. They can now, under an avatar or under a pseudonym, go into a website and have a conversation with another person, which is so it's so hard to monitor because a lot of these individuals are not who they say they are. And they're getting trapped into these places for phishing and for even just child stalkers and so forth. But my point is that because pornography and that addiction is so reinforcing to the brain, they are having a hard time not going to other healthier sites anymore. They literally get addicted and they visit them all the time. And these are some of the consequences. And we're processing through these in group sessions, usually in one-on-one sessions or a family session. So recent research has found that when you abstain from pornography, the effects are really salient, they're really tangible. So note some of these. There's an increased ability to delay rewards. That's fantastic, because when we're working with people in addiction settings and their brains are always about go, see what happens at the most basic level, according to NIDA, the National Institute of Drug Abuse, is that the go circuitry in that midbrain that we were talking about before, the nucleus accumbens gets activated and the reward circuit that's all about go gets activated, and the rest of the brain, and I'll talk about this in a moment, is not able to put the brakes on. So with abstinence, we see an ability of the person to delay their reward gratification. It renders people more able to take risks that are of a positive nature, i.e. Venturing out into new job opportunities or school opportunities. It renders people more altruistic, which is fascinating. So they actually are more giving. And there's other, not to sidebar too much on this, but altruism and giving of one's time or resources to another person actually helps people with sobriety. And we absolutely in our sober living homes make this a staple, that community service is part of what these young people are having to do in their recovery. It's sort of mandated. They get the option of having a job, but the community service function is with that built-in mindset that people would be altruistic and therefore having less cravings and improving their chances for sobriety. Finally, they are more extroverted, conscientious, and less neurotic, according to Wilson 2017. More benefits: improved overall energy, less social anxiety, a sharper mind with greater focus, decreased depression, a desire to interact with others in romantic relationships. One of the things that we see with porn addiction is that people are not going out and socializing as much. They're staying at their screen and they're staring at their screen all night long or at brief periods, and they're hiding it, and they develop an overall discomfort in normal human to human interactions, and it impairs their ability to connect in a romantic sense, as well as improve sexual function. So what's going on here? The neurobiology is broken down into 4 different pieces. First, sensitization. That is basically whenever you do the activity, the brain gets a reward bump for it. And so it's essentially, I liked this particular summation of it, an unconscious super memory of pleasure that's activated that produces cravings. And then the counterbalance to that, from the brain perspective, is desensitization. It is that numbing response to pleasure that corrects for the flooding of the sensitization. And this is the phenomenon that we always talk about as terms of tolerance. So once you are drinking alcohol and you drink for a while, your brain no longer gets the buzz that it got before in the most basic of senses. So where 5 or 6 beers would get you intoxicated, then you're needing 12. Now you're needing 15 to get the same effect. The same is true for the process addiction. So once a person might have seen a website for maybe 5 or 10 minutes and gotten quite the buzz of that from a neural perspective, it requires more and more and more exposure due to the desensitization response. I referenced this just a minute, or alluded to it a minute ago, but hypofrontality is the work of Nora Valco from NIDA way back several years ago, but it was groundbreaking. And what she and her colleagues found was that the frontal cortex is not functioning properly when you have major addiction processes, whether substance or process addiction. So it's basically the stop system. So the go system is live, it's active. Those reward pathways are being primed with the sensitization pieces with these various cross addictions and substances of abuse. But the go system is in full flow. The stop system is not activated at all. So the brakes are not working well, if you want to think about it like that. It's all about go. The stop system is not weighing in to be able to help the person understand the severity or the consequences of what's happening until such time as we gain some abstinence. And then we usually see the prefrontal cortical activity beginning to come back online. And then finally, a malfunctioning stress system, which is amplified stress responses in many ways. Though we talk about cravings and then relapses, inhibited will, and the withdrawal syndrome. So recommendations here and how to counsel the young person and the parent. We suggest removing it from the house or from devices. Interestingly enough, experts in sex addiction will tell you that if you change the overall, if you will, structure of your household, that can help. So the furniture, the associations, and the use with the phone when you're around others, as opposed to sort of holding yourself accountable. I'm going to only use my phone if that's where I got my access to the sites with, in front of other people, so that I will have some accountability. Consider a blocker or for ads or adult material. A lot of parents will initiate this on the television, and this is totally possible to institute on phones, to have all adult content, MA content blocked. And I definitely consider that for most families. Set mini goals and track the progress. Again, we're back to the journaling and taking ownership of what you can do, what's in your locus of control, and setting some small goals. And then finally, exercise, socialize, get outside, and then joining a support group can also help, especially with counseling and talking through this. There's such shame with respect to pornography. And I work with a lot of men who have this, and they feel like they cannot talk to their wives about it. They feel like they can't talk to their pastor. This is a big problem in the church. And I speak as someone who's an ordained minister by background. This is a huge problem in the church. People are very shamed for this. They're very embarrassed, and they don't want to talk about it. So with kids and young adults, especially, they think this is normal. Most of them are like, I don't see the big deal. This is what everybody does. But you want to start having conversations about it and let them have individual one-on-one contact with the professional, especially if it's becoming an issue. Okay, we're going to move into the social media craze and fear of missing out. I found this meme of FDR: the only thing to fear is missing out. So in a 2006 study, 13 to 18-year-olds spend over 72 hours per week connected to media. 68% of teens have created their own blog. 95% of teens have access to a smartphone in a recent study, and then 45% of teens admit to being online on a near constant basis. Do you hear that? Near constant basis. Just yesterday in group, I had to remind the young people to turn their phones off. I usually tell them, I say, I am not as interesting as your phone, but they all immediately, once I had a pause from the psychoed piece that I was presenting and we were about to move in process, they all whipped out their phones and they were immediately texting. And I said, hey, power down right now. And they know better, but they put it away. But it only took like 5 minutes, where we were kind of shifting from one mode to another, for them to absolutely need to check their phone. I literally have had clients in my own office that when my phone vibrates, they are nervous for me. They're saying, you need to check that. Your phone's vibrating. It could be important. And I'm saying, well, it can wait. We're in session. And they are this is multiple of my private clients. They're saying, you need to check that. So there's this natural reinforcement that's going on by just the vibration of the phone. There's a message coming in that needs to be answered. And so it's funny to me that many of them are more perseverative around me answering the phone because it could be important. They get so nervous. They want me, they won't sometimes relax until I power it down and put it away. They can't even focus on the session. Okay, so superimposed underneath, this is a really kind of interesting meme. It's a meme. It says, meanwhile, on Instagram, it's got all the guys at the table sitting around the dinner table with their telephoto lenses, taking pictures of their food. I thought that was hilarious. Basically, some of these stats are that 68% of adults have a Facebook account. 75% of those using Facebook do so daily. 78% of young adults, that is ages 18 to 24, use Snapchat, and 71% use Instagram. When I first started doing adolescent work with all of this coming on the scene. I've been doing adolescent work longer, obviously, than the internet. Again, dating myself. But when Snapchat came along, I didn't even understand what they were saying. And I said, "Are you saying snapshot?" And they were like, "No, Brannon, Snapchat. God, you're so lame." 78%, or excuse me, 78% use Snapchat. Lower income teens, interestingly enough, according to empirical research, are likely to use Facebook, 70% of those compared to others. So then 31% of teens feel their experience is positive with social media, which I thought was interesting. About 45% of those polled were neutral, and 24%, not quite a third, reported they had a negative impact due to social media. So what are some of the platforms that are being utilized? And I put them up there, the bigger ones: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. So 85% use YouTube. And again, in the parentheses, you can see how many use them most often. 72% use Instagram, 69% use Snapchat, 51% use Facebook, 32% use Twitter, 9% use Tumblr, 7% use Reddit. And then there was a none of the above, according to the Pew Research Center. Okay, this guy's really liking the fact that someone loved his post, and he's super excited about it. He's jazzed about it. So what are some of the warning signs that we can help parents and family members look at, as well as our clients? When there's excessive or problematic use of internets or games, how many hours a day are they using it? If they are absorbed and obsessed with internet sites and games, talking or thinking about it constantly, when we see anxiety, depression, or irritability when the games are over, or when the access is removed, or the computer is removed, or the device is removed, this is huge. I have another client family system that I'm working with, and I believe the oldest is 16, the youngest son is 11, and they both are on games constantly. The dad comes in, he sits down with his arms akimbo, and he has a scowl on his face, and I say, "Okay, Dad, I'm assuming that you want to start with the games." I've coached him about this, but the sons are on the games constantly, and they cannot seem to stop. And when he comes and says, "Your time limit is up," they freak out. One of the kids actually punched a hole in the wall because he was just in the middle of a game that he could not stop. We'll get to that in just a minute in terms of the video games. When you see kids having academic problems, when they're truant and sleeping in class, this can be another warning sign that there's a problem with social media and or gaming. Disinterest in sports, hobbies, friends, or other things that they used to do prior to the initiation of social media. Some of the other warning signs, I like this particular clock. It has at 12 o'clock like, at 1 o'clock chat, at 3 o'clock link, at 5 o'clock share, at I think about 7 o'clock news, at 9 o'clock post, and at about 10 o'clock tweet, and then 11 block. So literally constantly checking your social websites. Consistent isolation from their peer group. This is similar to with drugs of abuse. We see clients beginning to shift in their social behavior and their interactivity with their peer group. When they're lying about the time that they're spent on technology, the father that I was talking about says that they are constantly making up. "Well, I wasn't able to log on for a while. I haven't been on that long." The dad is tracking them actively. He's like saying, "You've already been on for 3 hours. You're done." "No, I haven't been on that long." They're constantly trying to pervert the truth about the technology. Changes or disregard for personal hygiene. We see a lot of clients fail to complete their activities of daily living, their personal hygiene, their oral hygiene, showering, changing of clothes, and so forth. Avoiding responsibilities around the house. This is constant. The parents and the kids are in a struggle around not doing their chores, not doing what they need to do in terms of keeping their room clean, doing their homework, and all of this would be in favor of the games or social media. Significant changes in diet and or sleep schedules is also a problem. What we see with excessive social media use and with video gaming is that unless they are controlled by the parent, a lot of these kids have free access through the summer, and they're staying up all night long to game and to post and tweet and to blog on their social media sites. So what are some of the effects on the mental health? Facebook and Instagram use has been correlated positively with symptoms of depression. I'm going to read that again. Facebook and Instagram use has been correlated positively, meaning it's a direct one-on-one correlation. With the higher use of Facebook and Instagram, there's a correlation and rise of the symptoms of depression in those who were studied recently. Higher use of Facebook has been associated with lower self-esteem cross-sectionally. Higher use of Instagram is correlated with body image issues. We have so many of these teenagers that are into body dysmorphia and cutting and disordered eating and eating disorders because they hate themselves. And why is that? Because on the social media piece, we're seeing the fact that they are comparing themselves constantly to other people. How can you not have a comparison piece when you're seeing everyone else post their best self, or even something that's not even real? The time spent in front of the screens is highly correlated with more depression symptoms and for risk of suicide-related outcomes. I found that one fascinating. Cross et al. Found that Facebook predicted, or use of Facebook predicted, less satisfaction with life over time. And then in a University of Pennsylvania study, listen to this, revealed that limiting social media by just 10 minutes a day on all platforms, significant impact on well-being, specifically loneliness and depressive symptoms, all declined in the experimental group. So what do we do about it? Keep your teens away from social media until later adolescence. Kids are just not mature enough to handle this. You need to monitor the device of your child and let them know that you're doing so. A lot of parents want to do this in private and hide it because they're afraid that if their kid knows about it, they'll go off and do it elsewhere. But I think it's important to have an open dialogue here. Remind the child that a healthy self-esteem comes from within, not based on external factors like likes, follows, or streaks. Having an open dialogue about it, and don't allow them to use the phone as an alarm clock. I had one of my best friend's daughter who just turned 12. She wants to use the phone as an alarm clock. My friend looked at me and she was like, nope, I'll get you a regular alarm clock. Well, let's look at video games. What is the allure here? It is an escape from reality. It satisfies their curiosity and provides a sense of purpose. There's a heightened sense of invincibility and feeding the ego. It's offering companionship. So many of my kids, and they've all connected on Discord, by the way, to play games and to talk with each other outside of the group setting. So it's meeting a need for love and acceptance. It satisfies a need for challenge and gratifies a desire to be a leader. And then there's a fulfilling of sexual fantasies as well. A Harvard Medical School estimate was that 40% of role-playing gamers showed signs of addiction, and she actually was a student of B.F. Skinner back in the day. She started a hospital program for treatment of that tech addiction. The AMA estimates that there are 126 million video gamers in the US. If only 10 or 15% are addicted based on research studies, that equates to between 12 and 18 million people. 84% of teens have a gaming system in their home, and 90% play video games on some type of computer console or cell phone. Note the use of violent games were up. The older you get, the more violent games you're exposed to. 25% of 8 to 10-year-olds, 60% of 11 to 14-year-olds, and 72% of 15 to 18-year-olds. Check out the meme there. He says, dude, you might want to stop for a bit. He says, just one more level, and it's a skeleton there. So there's a positive reinforcement piece. The schedules are modified slightly with the opponents and the levels getting harder and harder, but each time they gain something, weapons, experience, new armor, new level ups, each time the brain is getting reinforced to do this again. So the dopamine releases are telling the brain that it's better than expected, and the hedonic threshold is being altered. So in the idea of the hedonic or the pleasure threshold, the hedonic threshold rises so that anything that comes out underneath that threshold is not going to register as pleasurable anymore. That's part of the tolerance piece that we talked about before. So it's why a lot of kids no longer want to play the sports that they did, because the gaming of Call of Duty and the interactive things that they're doing now are simply just too reinforcing to the brain, and they literally are playing for hours at a time. There was a South Korean young man that actually died after playing for 80 hours straight. He was on video. He did not leave. He sat there sedentary, had poor hydration, and the autopsy basically said that he had a deep vein thrombosis, a blood clot in his leg due to lack of physical mobility. And he literally died from playing video games because of exhaustion, dehydration, and a deep vein thrombosis. 9 million children are obese in this country, linked to high cholesterol, type 2 diabetes, and poor cardiovascular health. And this is related to that sedentary piece of the games, as well as sleep deprivation, vision problems, seizures, and even damage to the central nervous system. So what we're seeing is a high correlation with ADHD right now, and that is directly correlated to the playing of video games and to the screen time. Okay, that is absolutely, we can prove this now with so many different research studies in this area. There's a reduced critical thinking. White matter was reduced in young people when they were exposed to screens for an excessive amount of time. There's reduced creativity and imagination, lower frustration tolerance. Note the client that I mentioned punching the hole in the wall when he was told to stop. Cognitive desensitization and aggression, same thing. Limited language development, also related to lower white matter development in younger children that are exposed to screens, and impaired prosocial behavior. Children do not know how to interact with each other using their words. They want to shoot out a meme, or they want to interact over screens. And finally, a disruption of morality, being rewarded for rules violations and socially unacceptable behavior. Grand theft auto is the example that I mentioned there. It's been linked to exacerbated depression, low self-esteem, social anxiety, and ADHD. In terms of the games, withdrawal signs would be anger, verbal abuse, feelings of emptiness, depression, sleep disruption, fantasies about playing the games and urge to go back to them and obsessing about them for long periods, rampant mood swings, crying excessively. The withdrawal syndrome, I've got Monster here, Animal from the Muppets. After 3 days of video game withdrawal, he's eating the symbol of his drum set. Sadness and loneliness, inability to find new activities or interests, lack of motivation or direction. One of the kids said, quote, I need them. It's my downtime. It's what I need. And so we're talking about a serious compulsory addiction to video games that are highly reinforcing to the reward circuitry of the brain. Excessive amounts of time spent sleeping at times once they crash, difficulty facing obligations, taunting or unfulfilling dreams, or believing that the games will somehow solve all their problems. Finally, we're going to look at gambling just real quick. I'm watching my time here. This is where we place something of value at risk with the hope of gaining something of greater value. So it's the pay to play arrangement. There's things at stake. There's an element of chance. And so 86% of Americans that were surveyed gambled in the past year for the sake of entertainment, excitement, recreation, or as just part of the culture. Games of chance are those kinds of things that where you cannot predict or influence the outcome. There's a variable ratio schedule of reinforcement, meaning that the reinforcement comes at not a predictable time. So it creates a greater and greater compulsion to keep going. So you can't develop or improve the winning strategies. And games like this would be the slots, the lottery, video poker, sports betting, card games, or the racetrack. Games of skill are differentiated there. Those are where you can build off of mastery. So we're talking about like things like darts, pool, golf, bowling, things that can be improved through practice, plays or moves that can be built on a previous play. So all of games of chance operate under the principle of independence of events. Each play has a separate event that's not influenced by previous plays and has no influence on future plays. Probability of winning gets no better by increasing the bets, reducing the bets, or extending the time gambling. The fallacy is you think if you sit on one machine long enough, it's going to pay out. So there's this illusion of control. They can create an intricate system of control over chance, and it's often related to an attributional bias where the wins are attributed to skill, the losses are attributed to an environmental factor or luck. The longer they do this, the more they can convince themselves that they're on a hot streak and that they have a fallacy there. So I noted that here. I've got the hot hand now. I've hit the last 5 in a row. And so the gambling person who's addicted gets completely convinced that there's a lot of things that they can do that they cannot. So the screen here says, ooh, I bet on black 8, but it landed right beside red 19. So red 19 has to come up soon. This is just the fallacy of gambling. Gambling addiction has been added to the DSM-5, and the criteria I show there. I'm going to move on with that. In terms of neurotransmitter activity, we have the same thing that we've been talking about all along with the release of dopamine, serotonin, epinephrine, opioid receptors, cortisols, and endorphins with the resultant effects there. on the right. Co-occurring substance use with gambling, alcohol use disorder, it's up to 75%, substance use disorder up to 40%, and nicotine use disorder up to 50%. Now I want to really focus on this one. Gambling addiction has the highest suicide attempt and completion rate of all addictions, twice that of alcohol and other substance abuse. 4 out of 5 people think about suicide, and 1 out of 5 people attempt suicide. And 5% of all suicides are related to some level of disordered gambling. For adolescents, we have several risk factors here to note for the parents. Male genders tend to gamble more. There's higher impulsivity and risk-taking, neurodevelopment, substance use abuse, depression, the adverse child experience, and victims of abuse piece correlates with this as well. Parental gambling can also be one way that they get into it, as well as peer gambling. This has become more and more of an issue now that Colorado has legalized sports gambling. And with all the casinos in the mountains, this has become a problem for our young adults. I used to see it all the time in the emergency department. So the risks are that there's no travel barriers. There's easy access to money. They can gamble for small amounts. Our young people they can play in comfortable, non-intrusive environments. And it's similar to video game technology. The digital money, the Bitcoin skews the virtual world and creates an illusion of no financial consequence. So now I'm finally going to wrap up here with some of the best treatment strategies for all these cross addictions. We're going to start with ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. I've bulleted out the fact that ACT is highly effective for cross addiction. And what is it? It's accepting things that you cannot change. It's accepting help from people who want to help you. It's accepting your feelings and situations rather than trying to change them. It's accepting that reality of life is hard. It's using combinations of acceptance skills, cognitive diffusion, values, the self as context, commitment skills, and mindfulness to address these issues. I've put up a little link there to be present. So this is about mindfulness. It's bringing you back to the present moment. It's noticing those experiences without judgment. It's opening up and being transparent about it. And then it's doing value-guided action, doing what matters. These are some of the core principles of acceptance and commitment therapy. We focus on what is most important to you. And so we help them come back to the present moment. A lot of people in addiction are fast forwarding to the future and are focused on the past. Mindfulness is accepting those realities in a non-judgmental way and being in the present moment. Some support for that found that ACT is at least as effective as any other active treatment comparisons in a recent study, and that 56% showed some favorability of ACT over other treatments. In another recent 2017 study, there was salient data to support that ACT approaches had a massive reduction in pornography addiction also. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is essentially targeting how we think, and our consequential behaviors follow those thought processes. So with CBT, the client can learn how to identify self-destructive thoughts and actions, to track them, to find ways to monitor them, their thought patterns, to learn new adaptive ways of thinking, and to apply skills that have been learned to these new situations and exploring new ways to handle them. 60% of clients treated with CBD for SUD uses were able to maintain sobriety after a year. That's a powerful statistic. One more time, 60% of people treated with cognitive behavioral therapy for substance use issues were able to maintain sobriety for over a year in a 2002 study. Dialectical behavioral therapy is a close cousin to CBT. It's the use of interpersonal effectiveness, mindfulness, distress tolerance, and emotional regulation to decrease the abuse of different types of substances and or process addictions, reducing painful withdrawal syndromes, diminishing cravings and temptations, avoiding situations that cue substance use, and creating community supports and encouraging engagement in recreational activities. So with DBT, we're talking a lot about, again, mindfulness practices, but also coping and containment skills, using opposite action, improving your interpersonal effectiveness. Distress tolerance is huge. I teach distress tolerance almost on a daily basis. How do you maintain the fact that right now, without your cell phone, you're about to freak out? Let's talk about what that is. I go back to the somatic experience of them, what's coming up in your body, and we do a lot of work around just breathing diaphragmatically and helping them come back to the moment without acting out. Motivational interviewing is also very important. You see the 4 basic stages there of engaging with the client and getting to know them, developing rapport, focusing them on a shared idea, evoking and bringing out the client's own argument for change. So with motivational interviewing, we're essentially rolling with the resistance that they have and putting the ball back in their own court. We're saying, what's important to you? And I wonder what it would look like if you're not motivated to change your gambling behavior and it's only about a 2 out of 10. What would a 3 out of 10 look like? How could we move you 1 point forward? And what would be important to you? Well, I don't want to get into fights with my parents on the way to Sandstone Care. Excellent. Let's try to work on that. We try to meet them where they are in that and help put the ball in their court. Finally, planning the client's willing and able to envision change and how they'll manifest it. MI has shown an upwards of 20% more effective than other treatment modalities when working with alcohol use disorder, interestingly enough. Finally, as an EMDR practitioner, I'm going to end with this one before we go to questions. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing is an effective treatment discovered by Francine Shapiro back in the 90s. So what we essentially do is with bilateral stimulation across the midline of the face, if we're using the ocular tracking, with the tactile pulsars, it's the same thing. What we're doing essentially is helping the left and right brain have a dialogue around whatever's traumatic. And in the sense of the fact of substance use or process addiction, that addiction is the trauma that we're trying to target. And so we can use a combination of eye movement, tactile, and audio stimulation. Where the addiction is concerned, the detour and the feeling state protocols are modifications of the base protocol for reprocessing and desensitizing neural pathways by targeting the craving itself. So I have a lot of people come in and they say, I'm craving heroin at a 10 out of 10. We work through that over the course of the session and we get that severity of the craving down to maybe say, a 2 or a 3 or hopefully even a 1 over the course of the session by using bilateral stimulation. Again, the idea is uncoupling these neural networks, these maladaptively encoded memories, i.e. the cravings and the addiction. And so it is highly effective in my personal experience with working with both process addiction and substance abuse addiction. That's all I have, guys. I'm open to questions at this juncture.
I can just read a couple of them. So let's see. David Gurenz, I'm curious about calling honey all natural when sugar cane is also all natural, quote unquote. Honey, as I understand it, affects the body the same as sugar.
So these were registered dietitians' suggestions in the sense that I think the overall metabolism of that substance is not going to be as significant as the processed sugar. So that would be my understanding on that one. It's true point. But I think they're talking about just as a taper, using that instead.
Okay, 2 more. Sean O'Brien, regarding naloxone usage with rats after consuming sugar, might the withdrawal anxiety symptoms experienced by the rats be as a result of extraneous variables such as chemicals within naloxone, the act of administering a rat with naloxone, etc.?
I'm sorry, my phone was ringing. Can you read it again, please?
Yeah, so regarding naloxone usage with rats after consuming sugar, might the withdrawal/anxiety symptoms experienced by the rats be as a result of extraneous variables such as chemicals within the naloxone, the act of administering a rat with naloxone, etc.?
Sure. According to the study, they were doing regular naloxone administration with heroin and other opioids and comparing it to what the rats look like with the removal with the administration with the sugar. So in that particular study, they found that the behaviors were identical. So that was their conclusion, was that it was having the same effect. But it's a good point. Do they absolutely 100% know that there weren't extraneous variables? That would probably be what we would call a limitation to the study. But the authors of that particular paper were saying that the visible results from the withdrawal, having added the Narcan, were the same as like an opioid withdrawal.
All right. And then really quickly, does gambling have a biological factor? Example, parents to children.
So John Bundrick, I have to give a shout out to him in terms of his winter symposium presentation. I got some of those stats with him, and he did cite heritability as a mode of transmission from parent to child. So yes, I would say the answer is yes in that, in terms of it being a heritable characteristic.
All right. Thanks, Brandon.
All right, I think we answered all the questions. Brandon, awesome presentation. That was really great, very informative and interesting and timely, I would say as well. So thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you Sandstone Care.
All right. Thank you,
Thanks, guys.
everyone.
Enjoyed it.
All
Appreciate it.
right, happy Wednesday.
Bye.
Bye-bye.